In this very in-depth forecast, widespread messy storms across the Arklatex region could bring the potential for a couple of tornadoes, widespread damaging wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour, and the possibility of scattered large hail. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for April 28th of 2024. For today we have an enhanced risk for the Arklatex region as well as a slight risk that extends all the way into southern Missouri here, across Louisiana, even into Mississippi, with a marginal threat that extends all the way into southern Wisconsin and northern Iowa there. Risks for today do include a 5% tornado risk for the enhanced risk region, a 30% damaging wind risk, which will be the primary risk for today, where we could see the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts that aren't necessarily going to be significant, but could definitely be overall over a very large area, as well as a 15% hail risk, where we could see the potential for some scattered large hail. Further off to the north, into more of the Iowa, Illinois, and northern Missouri region, we will have an overall lower end risk for severe thunderstorms, but we could see the potential for maybe one or two brief tornadoes, some isolated damaging wind gusts, and the potential for some isolated large hail. For tomorrow, we do have a marginal threat across the southern central plains and the Mississippi River Valley. Risks for tomorrow do include a 2% tornado risk for Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and portions of eastern Texas, a 5% damaging wind risk, where we could see the potential for some isolated damaging wind gusts, as well as a 5% hail risk, where we could see the potential for some isolated large hail. For our day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for eastern or western Iowa, northwestern Missouri, northeastern Kansas, and eastern Nebraska, mainly in the same areas where we had the potential for severe thunderstorms on the 26th last time on Friday. This does have a probabilistic 15%. I don't know what's wrong with the color there, but it does have a 15% on it, but we aren't really expected to see too much of a risk for significant severe thunderstorms. We may be able to see maybe an isolated significant severe thunderstorm. However, the overall risk for severe thunderstorms will probably be overall much lower for our day 3 outlook by the time this rolls around. Then for day 4 to day 8 outlook, we do have a 15% for the central plains, for central into eastern Kansas, as well as into western Oklahoma there, for our day 4 outlook, where we could be watching for the potential of some significant severe thunderstorms upcoming. But for our day 5 to day 8 outlook, we currently don't have anything issued. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast for today, we have a slight risk for flash flooding for the Mississippi River Valley into portions of Missouri there, for the southern half of Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, eastern Texas, eastern Oklahoma, and southeastern Kansas there, with the potential of flash flooding that's going to extend all the way up into southern Minnesota and Michigan there, where we could see the potential of at least some isolated flash flooding, but in the slight risk, we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for the Louisiana region, for southern Mississippi into portions of southeastern Texas there, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding and the potential for some isolated flash flooding that may extend all the way up north into southern Indiana. For our day 3 outlook, we do have two marginal risks. One marginal risk for the New England corridor there, for Pennsylvania, New York, I think New Hampshire, into Massachusetts, as well as a marginal risk that extends across the central plains into the Midwest, from north central Texas into Wisconsin and Minnesota, where we could see the potential for some scattered or for some isolated flash flooding. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks and how that will indicate our risk for heavy snowfall for today. We don't really have too much of a risk for heavy snowfall, but we could see the risk for some heavy snowfall in some elevated portions of the Rockies. Same with tomorrow, where we could see the potential of some heavy snowfall in elevated portions of the Rockies, and same with our day 3 outlook. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars, as well as our surface observations and how those will work in conjunction with our risk for severe thunderstorms. For today, we do have a pretty powerful trough that is continuing to advect in this region. That's what led to the risk for severe thunderstorms yesterday. We do have a pretty strong 500 millibar jet here, upwards of 70 knots in a small jet streak here that is going to be backing our storms, and that should feed into the region and support the risk for severe thunderstorms, as well as lead to quite a large amount of shear. Our low pressure system is actually further off to the north, with this jet streak kind of draping further down to the south. It is negatively tilted though, so the majority of our forcing will definitely be in this region. And then we also do have a cold front that is across central Texas here. This should push into the region over the next couple of hours and trigger our severe thunderstorms. And our trough should definitely lead to quite a lot of shear across this region, and will definitely be supportive of the potential for hail. Taking a look at our low-level jet and how that will affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a pretty powerful low-level jet across this region with 700 millibar flow that could potentially get upwards of 50 to 40 to potentially 60 miles per hour in some regions. We may see more localized 60 mile per hour wind gusts at 700 millibars, but we are mainly going to see flow at 700 millibars. That's probably going to be ranging around 50 to 40 knots across this region, which will definitely supply this region with some pretty hardy, some pretty decent, some pretty beefy directional shear across this region. And with winds mainly out of the south, but southwest at 700 millibars, and winds mainly out of the west, but also sort of out of the south at our 500 millibars, you can already see our how different our wind profiles are from 700 millibars to 500 millibars. And that will definitely lead to some pretty decent directional shear across this region. Same goes for further up to the north, where we may not see as much shear because our 500 millibar jet kind of looks like this, and with our 700 millibar jet looking like this. We won't see as much directional shear further off to the north, but our low-level jet will definitely extend all the way up into southern Missouri and western Illinois, and that will definitely supply this region with weaker directional shear, but still be supportive of the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that will affect our directional shear and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms with our spreading of our wind vectors aloft, we are expected to see a pretty strong 200 millibar jet that is probably going to not really affect too much into the Arklatex region, may stay further off to the west, and the majority of it will likely be off to the north here into more the Midwestern region. However, we definitely have a really powerful 200 millibar trough here that is mainly to the north. If it can extend further down to the south in this region, we could see 200 millibar flow upwards of 100 knots, but that is up into Oklahoma, so this will likely not really apply too much to the 15% hail risk across this region. However, we should definitely see a very large amount of speed shear up across the Midwestern region and Mississippi River valleys further off to the north there. As a result of that strong 200 millibar jet, will definitely support the potential for at least some isolated large hail further off to the north there. And then as far as our spreading of our wind vectors, we actually have what seems to be a little bit more confluence than we do have defluence there. So our wind vectors are kind of coming together around the Arklatex region, and that will kind of create a little bit more of a high pressure zone, especially aloft at our 200 millibars, and that will be overall more limiting towards our risk for severe thunderstorms. However, our wind vectors become extremely messy later on into the very late afternoon hours. We do have a little bit more spreading, so hopefully that confluence can go away and lead to overall a better risk for severe thunderstorms. But we definitely have some really noticeable spreading of our wind vectors there, and overall a much more lower end 200 millibar jet is going to be across this region with a 200 millibar flow. That's probably going to be extending from around 50 to 60 knots across this region, which will definitely lead to some more meager bulk shear across this region and be supportive of at least some scattered hail, but definitely won't lead to a crazy hail risk like we saw yesterday. Taking a look at our storm relative helicity and how that will affect our tornado risk across this region, we are definitely expected to see some pretty modest directional shear, especially compared to yesterday. With storm relative helicity values, they're still going to be getting upwards of 200 to 300, and maybe even a small pocket of 300 there. We are probably not going to see 1,000 storm relative helicity value just out in the open here. This is definitely as a result of contamination on our models. We are definitely not expected to see storm relative helicity upwards of 1,000 across this region. Our low-level jet will just not allow it. That is definitely contamination there, but overall we definitely have some pretty decent storm relative helicity values across this region that are expected to strengthen in the late evening and early morning hours of tomorrow, and will definitely be pretty supportive of the potential for a couple of tornadoes across this region. Depending on our instability, I definitely think maybe one significant tornado tornado can't be ruled out. Definitely think there may be a little bit of a significant tornado potential with this. In fact, this did have a 10% hatched region for tornadoes, I think, in one of the earlier updates, but that was removed for some reason. So I do think that there may be at least a small potential for a significant tornado, but it will depend on our instability. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that will lead to our hail risk across this region. Again, we are probably going to see some more modest speed shear values across this region, but we are definitely expected to see some pretty decent speed shear values here. With bulk shear values are probably going to be getting upwards of 50 knots and 40 knots ahead of our storms, but backing our storms, we may see a little bit more weaker bulk shear values, with bulk shear values upwards of 30 to 40 knots backing our storms. Further off to the north, though, where we do have a stronger 200 millibar jet, we do have some stronger bulk shear values as a result of that stronger 200 millibar jet and overall more speed shear. We are expected to see bulk shear values that could potentially get upwards of 60 to potentially 70 knots further off to the north there. However, further down to the south, we could definitely see the potential for some scattered large hail, but we probably won't really see anything too significant as far as hail, especially with the lack of strong 200 millibar flow aloft in this region. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity so we can go over some general radar analysis as well as our timing for our storms. We're going to start off with our radar analysis, and maybe I'll get to our timing. I usually forget to do it, but we are expected to see the majority of our storms potentially fire off in maybe a discrete mode or linear mode. Our geometry of our trough definitely supports our precipitation being vented off further to the east in more of a perpendicular fashion to our frontal zone or our frontal boundary. So that could support more of a linear mode, or sorry, not a linear mode, but a discrete mode. But it does look like we may have a potentially more semi-discrete mode with some messy convection. We could definitely see some more discrete storms in a line here, but it definitely looks like they may be a little bit more on the messy side of things. Especially further down to the south, we may potentially get a couple of these clusters of some semi-discrete storms, and maybe a little bit more on the messy side of things, but we could definitely see some clustered semi-discrete storms. And this could either organize into potentially a linear type of system or a very messy linear system. We could definitely have some very widespread rainfall, with it being heavier in some regions and some updrafts just kind of scattered all over the place. Or we could just have it develop into a more of an organized linear mode. Either or will be definitely more supportive of an overall damaging wind risk than more of a tornado risk, because our storm mode relies heavily, our tornado risk relies heavily on our storm mode, and if we can get some discrete storms going, those will overall have the better tornado potential. But still, regardless, even if we don't get discrete storms going, we will still see the potential for a couple of tornadoes to come out of them. And then as far as our timing, we are expected to see some upscale growth, even though we already have severe storms ongoing. We are expected to see the majority of our upscale growth begin around 5 p.m. across this region, move into the enhanced risk region likely around midnight. These are going to be pretty slow moving. They're going to move into the Tyler, Longview, Texarkana, College Station, Woodlands region around midnight or around 11 p.m. for this region, and they should move through the center of the enhanced risk region around 3 a.m. to 2 a.m. into more of a messy system, potentially linear mode, impacting the Shreveport and Longview regions, as well as extending down into Houston potentially as well. And then the majority of our storms could definitely be robust as they exit out of the enhanced risk region, but the sun will definitely be set and may even begin to rise because of how slow our storms are going to be moving. Our storms could continue in the enhanced risk region to around 7 to 6 a.m. By tomorrow, but move into the Louisiana region by around 5 to 7 a.m. So these are going to be really slow moving, and there's definitely a lot of time for anything to really happen. And with how widespread our coverage of our storms are expected to be and how slow moving they're going to be, we could definitely see the potential for a flash flooding risk to come out of this. We definitely saw flash flooding risk yesterday due to some really widespread and heavy rainfall, and we could definitely see that happen again with some very widespread and heavy rainfall in a lot of these storms. So we will definitely have to watch for a flash flooding potential, but again, our risks will also be primarily damaging wind gusts with the additional risk of a couple of tornadoes. Taking a look at our dew points and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty large amounts of moisture across this region at the surface, and that will continue to be resupplied into this region. Whatever is lost will definitely be immediately resupplied, especially due to the close proximity to the Gulf of Mexico and how much moisture is currently built up in the Gulf of Mexico. We could see dew points that could potentially get upwards of the low 70s across this region, and that will definitely be very supportive of some very large amounts of instability across this region. The main uncertainty with our instability, though, will likely be the fact that the majority of this risk is probably going to happen more at night. This is definitely going to be a little bit more of a nocturnal event, so that will likely lead to some overall less surface instability and more surface convective inhibition across this region, and may be a more limiting factor to our risk for severe thunderstorms. Our timing for our storms is definitely going to play a major role in our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty hot temperatures across this region before storms actually get going, with temperatures that could potentially reach the mid 80s across the enhanced risk region. However, when our storms do develop again, it will be a more nocturnal event with some lower temperatures because of it being nighttime. We are expected to see temperatures that could reach the mid 70s across the enhanced risk region while storms are ongoing. May even be able to drop down to the low mid 70s across this region. That will definitely still support quite a lot of instability across that region. Still definitely some decent temperatures. It's definitely not going to be as high as the 80s, but we may see some overall more limited instability as a result, but still 70 temperatures at the surface and dew points in the 70s at the surface. Those will definitely make a great combination for some pretty large amounts of instability, even if our temperatures are more on the limited side. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that will affect our instability across this region, as well as how that may aid in a hail risk, we are expected to see some pretty decent lapse rates across this region. That definitely may be on the more limited side of things, with lapse rates that could be in the mid 70s. That is definitely a little bit more on the moderate end of things, but at least it isn't zero, and we will definitely see some pretty decent aid from our instability come out of that, which will definitely be needed to fuel significant severe thunderstorms. Maybe an isolated significant severe thunderstorm may be possible. Severe thunderstorms will definitely be a little bit more on the lower end, especially compared to the last 2 days. But still, our lapse rates will definitely be needed to really aid in any instability whatsoever across this region, especially at the surface, because of the fact that this is going to be more of a nocturnal event. And this will also aid with our hail risk as well, because it will lead to a much more larger and an expanded layer for hail development. Taking a look at our cloud cover and how that may affect our instability and our atmospheric recovery from last night's storms. We did have our storms that did pass through here that kind of just fizzled away after they encountered more convective inhibition last night. But we do have some storms that are currently ongoing, and this is going to be the precursors of what's going to come later on this afternoon. We do have a pretty significant lack of cloud cover across this region, and that will definitely lead to a lot of surface heating across this region. And that will definitely allow for a lot of atmospheric recovery pretty quickly, and definitely support some large amounts of instability across this region, especially at the surface. With the fact that this will potentially be a little bit more of a nocturnal event, we will lose that surface heating. However, a lot of that instability will likely linger on into the early to late evening hours across this region. So this atmospheric recovery will definitely be key in supporting a potentially larger risk for severe thunderstorms than originally forecasted. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and how that may affect our convective inhibition, as well as our instability and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms later on this afternoon. For right now, we don't really have an environment that's currently capped because our storms are currently already developing, but we do have warm air advection that is leading to a pretty stout cap, or not a cap, but more of an elevated mixed layer across this region, which will definitely limit our storms at least a little bit. But by the time that elevated mixed layer is broken, that will definitely lead to some more explosive storm development, and will likely also allow for instability to build underneath it as well. And potentially help in more of a discrete mode. However, the majority of our convective inhibitions is just going to be uncapped. The majority of our warm sector isn't going to have a cap on it. We will definitely have a convective inhibition that's going to be introduced later on into the very late evening hours and the early morning hours of tomorrow when our storms are moving through the enhanced risk region. That will definitely lead to overall more convective inhibition. However, with warm air advection out of the south, it doesn't look like this warm sector is going to be capped. It likely looks like it's going to be it looks like it's going to remain uncapped even when the sun has already set, which will allow for our storms to continue going and feeding off of that warm sector there. However, our warm air advection in our elevated mix layer will continue to advect into this region and will likely kill off our storms after the sun sets and they lose surface heating, at least slowly, because there won't be a whole lot of convective inhibition introduced, but our elevated mix layer will definitely slowly chip away at our storms very slowly into the afternoon hours, the very late evening hours, and the very early morning hours of tomorrow. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that will fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms overall, we are expected to see some pretty decent cape values across this region, with cape values that could potentially get upwards of the mid to low 2000s across this region when storms actually develop. But this will be around 11 to 10 p.m. across this region. We will definitely see lower end instability values due to the fact that this will be a more nocturnal event, with cape values that could drop into the upper and mid 1000s and maybe linger around the low 2000s, but mainly around the upper to mid 1000s. Still going to be sufficient to fuel the potential for maybe an isolated significant severe thunderstorm, but definitely fuel the potential for the couple tornadoes, some widespread damaging wind gusts, and the potential for some scattered large hail. And our instability will definitely be pretty strong. It's definitely not going to be too impacted by the fact that this will be a little bit more of a nocturnal event. We will definitely see lower instability values whenever the sun does set, but it shouldn't really be too impacted. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how this may lead to the potential of tornadoes and surface-based storms across this region, I don't really have too much to say about this other than the fact that it does look like the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface. We are still expected to see some pretty decent surface-based cape, which will definitely be lower compared to our most unstable cape whenever the sun does set, but it will definitely still hold steady around the upper 1000s into the low 2000s. It will definitely be slightly lower than our most unstable values, but we'll definitely be able to fuel the potential for surface-based storms and the potential for tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that may aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we are expected to see a pool of 0 to 3 kilometer instability that is expected to sit across this region. We are definitely expected to see some weak to moderate 0 to 3 kilometer cape values across this region, which will definitely be an aid in fueling our overall risk for severe thunderstorms and may allow for a hotspot for a cheat code to develop later on in the late evening hours of tonight, in the very early morning hours of tomorrow, and that will definitely aid in our overall tornado potential and fueling these severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate our tornado risk across this region, we are expected to see some pretty decently strong energy helicity index values across this region that are definitely in line with a 5% tornado risk, with energy helicity index values upwards of 3 to 2 to potentially an isolated 4. We do have an area of contamination here, though, as I was mentioning previously with our storm relative helicity. We are definitely not expected to see raw energy helicity index values upwards of 11 today. We just don't have the thermodynamics to really support it, but we could definitely see some pretty decent energy helicity index values across this region, which will definitely be supportive of the potential for a couple tornadoes, and I definitely can't rule out a significant tornado being possible, but we may definitely see the potential for a couple tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that will indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region, we are definitely expected to see some widespread damaging wind gusts with our storms here. You can definitely see a very large swath of some pretty strong damaging wind gusts, with damaging wind gusts that could potentially get upwards of 50 to potentially some 60 miles per hour across this region. And you can definitely see how widespread those damaging wind gust swaths are. So definitely have the potential for some widespread damaging wind gusts, and some damaging wind gusts that may be approaching some significant values, but we probably won't really have too much of a damaging wind risk, especially compared to yesterday. With a damaging wind risk with large amounts of defluence aloft that will definitely allow for our 200 millibars to translate down to our surface and lead to some pretty strong damaging wind gusts. We could definitely see some pretty widespread and maybe some significant damaging wind gusts. I'm unable to go over our hail risk for today because I have run out of time and I do have to go take care of stuff now. So now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please start weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast or like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.